Communication, for communication to be actually communication, it must be productive and it has to take you somewhere. And in nearly 35 years of working with couples as a psychologist, a family law mediator, and a collaborative divorce facilitator, I've watched couple after couple talk constantly at each other, to each other, and go absolutely nowhere. And I want to show you why. And more important, where communication is actually supposed to land. So throughout the 90s, I gathered data for my doctoral dissertation on engaged couples. And I asked these people who were planning their weddings, I asked them about their values and their expectations for marriage. And what I found has informed everything I've done in working with couples since. In this research, the word communication came up every single time I spoke with somebody. And it came up many times over all of the interviews. And it was the single most cited factor in what these couples, these individuals in the couple, believed would make their marriage work. But then I asked them to define it, define what communication means. And not one person, not one, could give me a clean definition. So they knew they needed it, but they had no idea what it actually was. And here's another finding that stopped me. Nearly half of the people I spoke with also said they had a 0% chance of divorce. Not even low, thinking about the statistics on divorce. They believe they had 0% chance of divorce. And I want us to sit with that for a moment because these were intelligent, thoughtful people who love their partners, and they had constructed, almost without knowing it, a belief system so insulated from reality that the possibility of failure just didn't even exist inside of it. And that's not a character flaw. I'm not trying to be mean, but that's what happens when you walk into something this significant, like an engagement, like a life together with somebody, without a framework for actually looking at it. And so I want to give you this framework. Every person, each and every person who walks into a marriage carries what I call the core architecture. So we have the framework, we have this core architecture, and the core architecture is the deep structural reality of who you actually are, who the other person actually is. It's your attachment style, your conflict patterns, your family of origin running quietly in the background like a program. And this is software that you didn't choose, but you can't uninstall it. It's in there, it's built in there. These are your values, your fears, your history, your parents' history, your grandparents' history. So you get it. It's all of it. And about 70% of what couples call their issues, so out of the 100% of everyone's issues, there are 70% of the issues that come directly from this core architecture. This 70% is what I call the perpetuals. These are not problems. These are the perpetuals. These are the things that are always going to be there. These are the things that come from childhood, history, all the millions and billions of interactions you've had. And this distinction is not semantic. So a problem has a solution. We all know that. But a perpetual is structural, and it belongs to who someone is, and who someone is doesn't really change. And this is where most couples go wrong. They will spend years and sometimes their entire marriages by the time I see them trying to solve in this 70% that is perpetual. That is who you are. That really doesn't change. They try better conversations, more patience, different tactics, of course, better communication. We have to communicate about this. And they keep arriving at the same place. Same conflict, different day, not because they're failing, not because they don't love each other, not because their relationship is terrible, but because they're trying to solve something that was never meant to be solved. It's impossible to solve. The other 30%, so we had the 70% that were the perpetuals, and the other 30%, the solvable problems, and people always groan when they hear that the solvable is only 30% of the issues. Those do respond to conversation. Those do respond to compromise. Those can change because they're solvable. And you should handle those. Those are real. They matter. But the 70% does not change, does not get addressed from problem solving like the solvable does. The 70% requires something different entirely. And this is where communication, real communication, not talking, not chatting, not saying words, actually goes. And it's not for resolution purposes. It's not for problem solving because that doesn't work in the perpetuals. It's not to agreement because you don't have to agree on the perpetuals. It's not to work it out because there's no working out in the perpetuals. But what is the strategy here is what I call radical understanding. It's a comprehension of your partner's core architecture and their comprehension of yours. And it's an understanding so complete, so clear-eyed and honest. That's why I call it radical, that the perpetual loses its power to destabilize you. It loses its power as an issue. So you're not trying to change the other person. You're not trying to win anything. You're not trying to get them to come over to your way of being. You're actually doing something harder and more useful. You're learning to see, to understand exactly where they're coming from, their history, their wiring, their fears, with enough clarity that when the pattern shows up, you recognize it. Ah, here is their perpetual again. And the recognition changes everything. So this becomes productive communication. This is where the conversation is supposed to land. And it's not in better phrasing. It's not in I statements that we're all taught to do to problem solve, which are appropriate in problem solving. But this radical understanding is in genuine understanding of the architecture behind your partner's words and their understanding behind your words as well. So what requires a gentle conversation at year one to address the core architecture if it's not communicated about may require an intervention at year 7. This is how perpetuals accrue over time and lead to resentment if there's not the radical understanding of your partner. So this cost of unmapped perpetuals accrues quietly, steadily over time without the radical understanding. And the sad part for me that I'm trying to address is that most couples walk into marriage without ever having looked at any of this, not because they're careless or ignorant or don't know how to be in a relationship, but because these are tools that no one has ever given them to understand what is really going on inside of their marriage. And so most therapy exists. By the time many couples come to me, they're in crisis and there's therapy for when things are already breaking down or broken down or irreconcilable. But these premarital assessments and checklists that do exist barely scratch the surface and don't give you that full picture of what your marriage is actually going to look like. And so, unfortunately, couples arrive at the wedding. You're full of love, it's beautiful, you're full of certainty, and carrying two complete core architectures that they have never actually looked at together. So the first few years of the nitty-gritty of being in a marriage will create the looking for them, but this is usually in the form of these fights, these conflicts recurring. And many times they keep coming up, even though one or both of you may have thought it was resolved. So this is what I created the Intimacy Prenup for, and I love this. I love this assessment tool. It's not a legal document. It's not couples therapy homework. It's a structured, research-based assessment that actually maps your core architecture for both of you together before the wedding or at any point when you are in a committed relationship and want to reach an alignment. I also have a post-nup for people who are married and want to do this. But this is for people who are at the earlier stages who haven't even begun to understand your partner's core architecture. So these are 108 questions, and they map 11 domains of your shared life. It shows you where your architectures align, and that is going to be broad, most likely, but it also will show you where your perpetuals are going to live in your unique marriage. And most important, where your actual strengths are as a couple so you can continue building those. And most couples never find those out either, by the way. They're too busy being surprised by the friction in the beginning to even understand, wow, we're really aligned in so many places. Let's not get distracted by these perpetuals. And so what happens is you take the assessment individually and you get a report together, which leads to the real communication that matters before you're landing in some conflict, crisis, and this is your very important work. And that's what the Intimacy Prenup is. So the link is in the description. It's $47. I priced it so that it's probably less than a dinner, but the value and the information you'll receive from this is rich and very useful. So I've been doing this work, like I said, for 35 years. I've taken this Intimacy Prenup with my own husband, and I felt so proud about how the results that he and I shared supported some amazing conversations and growth between us as far as I'm concerned so far. So if you're engaged and you're serious about what comes after the wedding, and not just the day of the wedding, that's the very beginning, but you're serious about your marriage. These are the conversations, these are the communications to have now. So I'll see you in there. Talk to you soon.